For those of you who I may not have had the pleasure of meeting, or at least meeting in a while, my name is Randy Lober, Growth Marketing Manager at Action Benefits. And part of my job, in fact, the biggest part of my job, is helping you all, our independent agent partners, grow and maintain your books of business in whatever way we can do that. In our co-broker space, one of the ways we know your groups are looking for support, especially your groups of over 20. They're looking for support with COBRA compliance. How do we stay compliant? What are the rules? What are the laws? How do I manage all those reporting deadlines? And is there a way to actually make any of this easier on myself, being the client, or their HR staff, or even you ultimately as their insurance agent? Because COBRA is a health insurance problem, so it ends up becoming your problem too. Here to help us solve that problem is Johanna Green from our partners at isolved. I'm going to ask her to get started and introduce herself in just a few moments. Welcome, Johanna. Thank you for joining us here today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Well, hi, it's nice to see everybody. I don't have my camera turned on specifically because my presentation is the star of the show, not me. Randy did mention ways to make your life easier where COBRA is concerned. The very easiest way I can tell you is to hire a COBRA administrator such as isolved for an employer to alleviate some of that administrative burden and confusion that goes along with COBRA. And as we move through today's presentation, you are going to understand exactly what I'm referring to. So let's get started because this is a lengthy presentation and I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. I'll do some temperature checks throughout the presentation and see if there are any questions, but there will be some opportunity at the end for some Q&A should we come up to that hour mark. So let's start by introducing myself. My name is Johanna Green. I have over 25 years of broker experience in both a territory manager capacity as well as a sales executive. I have over 9 years of employee benefits industry experience, having started my career at Health Alliance Plan back in the late 90s, and then coming back over to the side of the house with isolved 4 years ago. My anniversary was actually last Saturday. I'm a Michigan native. I was born and raised in Genesee County, which is where I'm talking to you from today. And my current role here at isolved is sales executive for benefit services. So anything benefit services related, that would be COBRA, FSAs, HSAs, HRAs, FMLA, and leave management. All of that is my wheelhouse. You'll want to come to me for anything related to that for new business sales. So without further ado, because like I said, COBRA is the star of the show today. I'm so sorry. Hi, double clicked. Let's talk about a review of COBRA. And we're going to do this on a high level to begin with. So COBRA actually came into law in April of 1968 under the Reagan administration. This is a law that applies to employers and not to the insurance carrier or the broker. So if there's something that goes sideways and a report made to the DOL, it's the employer that could be on the hook for fines. So it is very important that the employers make sure to comply with all the complexities that go along with COBRA. The rule of thumb for whom is required to offer COBRA is 20 or more employees in the previous calendar year. But we're going to discuss this in a little more detail shortly as well. And then there are both rights to continuation of coverage and notice requirements that need to be met under COBRA. You know, while COBRA's been around for over 30 years, employers are still struggling to comply and it continues to evolve. The addition of ACA did not eliminate COBRA, but certainly does affect it. So you may have also noticed that activity has increased where COBRA enforcement is concerned. So let's start with who must comply. As I mentioned earlier, COBRA rule of thumb is any private sector employee with 20 or more employees in the previous calendar year that offers a group health plan. They must also offer COBRA. Those employers who offer church plans, they are not subject to COBRA. And of course, while they implemented the law for the private sector, the federal government is also not subject to COBRA. Just to touch on the church plans really quick, if you have, say, St. Mary's Catholic School, and they are offering a regular Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan plan, that is not considered a church plan and therefore subject to COBRA. So just because the entity is part of a church does not designate whether it's subject to COBRA or not. It is based on the health plan itself as far as the church is concerned. So let's jump into employee count. Which employees need to be included in that 20 employee count? It's a pretty common question, pretty important too. To begin with, we want to include both part-time and full-time and seasonal employees. All of those are included in the count. Who needs to offer COBRA is not based on the eligibles to participate in the health plan, but the total number of employees at the group. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The other portion of employees who need to be included in that 20 count are those employees under common ownership. So maybe you have an employer who has 3 businesses, all under common ownership. Business 1 has 10 employees, business 2 maybe has 7 employees, and then business 3 has 5 employees. That makes their total employee count 22. That makes them subject to COBRA. Foreign employees are another group of employees that are required to be included in that employee count as well. And finally, those employers that fall under a multiple employer plan or MIWA, something you may or may not be familiar with. To give you an example about a MIWA, we work with a large dental group here at isolved. And while each particular dental office only has maybe 1 or 2 employees, collectively, there are over 1,000 total employees under that MIWA, which makes them subject to offer COBRA. So that's the down and dirty of who is required to offer COBRA. Do I have any questions from anyone thus far before we move into the next stage? I will.
Doesn't look like it just yet, Johanna.
Perfect. And I do have the chat window open, but Randy, I really appreciate it if you could keep an eye on that since I'm focused on the presentation. I appreciate it. So let's talk about TAMRA. So we know that the IRS occasionally steps in to conduct an audit, right? That's the fear everybody has, and that's what we want to make sure we're prepared for with compliance. TAMRA is actually the law that makes sure that it's being done correctly. So what does that mean? Under TAMRA, there are 4 guidelines that the IRS audit will focus on for those that are responsible for administering COBRA. Number 1 is COBRA training. The individuals that are responsible for COBRA compliance, do they know what they're supposed to do? Are you continuously training them on timeframes and notices and stuff like that? That's very important. Number 2 is written instructions. Since it's a guideline written under TAMRA, it must be documented, right? You need to have written instructions as to what you're supposed to do. Notices need to go out within a specific time frame. Premiums must be made within this time frame. All of those things must be written with detailed instructions. So that way, those that are required to comply with how this is and go under an audit, they know what they're doing. And then number 3, the program needs to be designed and updated. So the program itself needs to be logical and it must make sense. It must also follow not only the guidelines, but it must be able to be easily administered, which is where companies like isolved come into play. And then finally, the program itself must be monitored. Are you continuing with the evolution of COBRA? Are you doing things correctly? If verbiage changes in a notice, do you have somebody checking and monitoring that? That way it gets updated in accordance with those legislative changes, etc. Each of these 4 items here must be met to pass a TAMRA checklist. If the IRS steps in and says, I'm going to enforce TAMRA on your COBRA compliance, they will enforce this whenever an audit is identified. There could be compliance that drives it. It could be just documentation or packages that they want to see. They could also want mailing information. So there's a lot of moving parts here. So are there any questions on the law that measures the compliance and audits from the IRS before I move to the next piece? I will take that silence as a no. And let's move on to the inner workings of COBRA. And we're going to start with qualifying beneficiaries. Sorry, my coffee hasn't kicked in. So now that we know who's subject to COBRA and that TAMRA steps in if there's an IRS audit to make sure that things are being done correctly, let's discuss who's eligible to take advantage of COBRA. This is called a qualified beneficiary. And a qualified beneficiary is going to be defined as an individual that is covered on the group health plan that's either the employee, could be a covered spouse, or it could be covered dependents. So any of those qualify under the definition of qualified beneficiary. Each qualified beneficiary has independent election rights under COBRA, which means if you are the employee and you have family coverage, or if you're the employee and you're covering your entire family today and you lose your employment, COBRA is offered to you, it is offered to your spouse, and it is offered to your dependent children. Each one of them have the opportunity to say, I want to elect COBRA for just myself. Maybe I want to elect a family plan because you all need it, but perhaps it's an unaffordable premium and you only need to elect it for your children to keep them on coverage until you're able to obtain new group coverage. You have independent election rights for each one of those qualified beneficiaries under COBRA. And then, of course, any child that's born to or placed in adoption by the covered employee also becomes a qualified beneficiary. So does everybody understand? Are there any questions on what a qualified beneficiary is? You guys are too easy today. I love it. Let's move on to qualifying events and extensions. So now that we know that the person is being offered COBRA as a qualified beneficiary, let's talk about a qualified event and extension. A qualifying event defines when an eligible employee is able to be offered coverage. So there's two things that must be present for COBRA to be offered. Let's talk about those and what events look like. So something happened and it's forcing coverage to terminate. It's forcing that particular individual off the group health plan. Both things must happen for COBRA to be offered, the event plus the loss of coverage. I emphasize that because a lot of times an employee may voluntarily say, remove me from coverage, and I'm going to enroll in my spouse's plan over there or now, or something along those lines. Well, guess what? There's no event other than somebody saying, take me off the plan. There is a loss of coverage, but there is no event. As a result, no event means no COBRA to be offered. You just want to be sure to keep those things in mind, that you must have both the event and the loss of coverage in order for it to be a COBRA qualifying event. So let's move on to the extension piece of this. So now there's a couple different types of events. The most common are the 18-month events. Obviously, termination of employment is the most common. Somebody's lost employment, forcing them off of the group health plan. Now they're saying, hey, COBRA is available to you. Do you want to continue it? It is considered an 18-month event. If they elect, they can continue that group health plan coverage for the next 18 months. If they experience a reduction in hours, so this will apply where their termination is voluntary or not, either is considered a qualifying event because it is a reduction in hours. So somebody went from full-time to part-time, or maybe there's an intermittent leave situation, something like that, and they're no longer eligible for the group health plan because they had a reduction in hours. That is considered a qualifying event. It's forcing them off of the group coverage. So we have to offer COBRA to them for 18 months. You're also able to extend past that 18-month time frame. If there's a secondary event, which is listed here, excuse me. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had something just go sideways on me technologically. So if you can extend past that 18-month time frame, if there's a secondary event that is listed here, the employee passes away, there might be a divorce situation, or maybe the dependent ages off the plan. All of those are considered to be secondary events, which would give the surviving or remaining spouse and remaining dependents an extra 18 months of coverage. If one of those extensions occurs and the COBRA eligible individual qualifies, then they're offered 29 months of COBRA. The most common of these is going to be termination of employment. If you get 18 months of continuous benefits, it can actually be extended past that if that secondary event occurs. If you, as the former employee, meets the criteria for Social Security disability extension, there are really kind of three things detailed here, but you must meet all three of them in order to be granted and add additional 11 months for your original 18 months, which would make your total COBRA time frame 29 months. So that disability, the qualifying event was the covered employee's termination or employment reduction, and the QB notifies the plan administrator within 60 days after the Social Security determination disability. Therefore, the coverage and of the original 18-month maximum coverage period. So that is the 29-month disability extension, which brings us to the final piece of that, which is our 36-month qualifying event. So we've covered the 18 months for a qualifying event, and then we've added an additional 11 months for an extension. So keep in mind, there's no legislation out there today that allows for COBRA to be extended past that 36 months. That's very important. Now, these types of qualifying events tend to affect a spouse independence. It's actually a little bit more favorable for them. So you can see here, it's like those secondary events to the original kind of termination of employment. If there's been a death of the employee, an employee enrolls into Medicare, forcing the spouse and dependents off the plan. If there's been a divorce situation, dependents aging off the plan, or bankruptcy of the employer, all of those are considered 36-month events for those remaining individuals on the coverage, spouse, or dependents. Any questions on events before I move into the employer's reporting responsibilities? So let's move on to what the employer reporting responsibilities are. These are events that are controlled specifically by the employer. Those events are the termination of employment, reduction in hours, death of the employee, Medicare entitlement of the employee, or if they're filing bankruptcy. Those events those are the specific events that the employer is responsible for. They need to report it to their COBRA administrator. If they're in fact outsourcing it, if they are administering it themselves, they're required to take care of that themselves. By administering themselves, they completely become responsible for this, which is a huge thing. But the employer isn't the only person who has reporting responsibilities. The employee does as well. So obviously those 36 months events are going to be things that can't really be controlled or visible to the employer. That makes it the employee's responsibility to report and to notify either the employer or the COBRA administrator. As an example, a divorce or dependents aging off the plan, those disability extensions and secondary extensions, all of those are the responsibility of the employee to notify either the outsourced COBRA administrator like isolved or the employer. So are there any questions on the reporting responsibilities?
Johanna, we did have a question come in, not
Yeah,
about reporting responsibilities, but back to the events for just a moment.
sure.
Alan would like to know, suppose a employer goes bankrupt during the middle of a qualified beneficiary's COBRA eligibility. So they're enrolled in COBRA, whether it's an 18th or 36-month event, and the employer goes bankrupt. So once the employer goes out of business, does COBRA continue or does it stop once the employer's gone out of business?
COBRA would stop, but notices need to be sent out, and I'll go into a little more detail on that when we get to the notice section. Good
All right,
question.
thank you.
Of course. Any other questions before I move forward? Wonderful. So let's talk about COBRA coverage. So to recap, we now know that employers with 20 or more employees within the preceding calendar year must comply with COBRA. They're subject to it. We know that COBRA is offered to qualified beneficiaries, which is considered an individual covered on the group health plan the day before their qualifying event. So that's something to keep in mind. If they were only insured with that group health plan for one day and they had a COBRA qualifying event, they are eligible for COBRA. And then we know that COBRA can be offered for 18, 29, or 36 months of coverage, depending. So now let's discuss what plans are actually subject to COBRA. Not all employer-sponsored plans are going to be subject to COBRA. The ones that you would think, of course, are applicable, such as medical, dental, vision, regardless of who's being covered or how much the premium the employer pays versus employee. I do get sometimes employers that cover 100% of the premium for dental and vision employees. So the employee doesn't pay anything out of pocket. It doesn't matter. It is still employer sponsored. It's still a group health plan. It's subject to COBRA. So medical, dental, vision, healthcare FSAs, HRA plans, ICRAs, which are individual coverage HRAs, some EAP, wellness, and voluntary plans are also subject to COBRA. I say some of them because there are certain criteria that would make an EAP subject to COBRA. So EAPs, as an example, and certain wellness programs and certain voluntary plans may be applicable to COBRA. The rule of thumb to understand when is the group, it has to offer some sort of coverage for medical care to meet that definition of a group sponsored health plan. Those are things you need to be mindful of with those last three plans. There are EAPs, wellness and voluntary benefits. For example, sometimes you might see an EAP plan that offers like sports physicals that are covered. Anything like that covered through that program is considered medical care, making it subject to COBRA. If you have an EAP that does not offer something like that, then it is not subject to COBRA. Now, what does not apply to COBRA? That would be life insurance, disability, and HSA programs, and long-term care. None of those are subject to COBRA, probably because they're typically portable. Post-employment, you can get them, you can keep them, you can pay for them directly. They are not subject to COBRA for that reason. So those will not print on the notice offering. Something important to keep in mind. Any questions on what plans are subject to COBRA? Perfect. Oh my goodness. I apologize. Again, my computer's acting funny. All right. So I'm going to touch on FSAs really quick. So FSAs are COBRA eligible if the payroll contribution amount exceeds the amount utilized, providing the employee with a positive balance. Then they can utilize their FSA under COBRA. If there are no dollars left in the FSA at the time of a qualifying event, then the FSA does not apply and is not COBRA eligible. So they have to have a positive balance in that FSA in order for it to be subject to COBRA. Otherwise, they cannot continue to participate in that FSA. HRAs is another persnickety one. So for HRAs, the premium must be calculated based on an actuarial basis. You cannot take the allowance, divide by 12, and then add 2% to determine COBRA. You must look at the numbers that go into it. What's the utilization of the plan? Who's participating in the plan? What type of admin fees? There's some requirements around calculating that COBRA premium. So keep that in mind. You know, it's not as simple as just taking that total benefit divided by 12 and adding the 2%. The COBRA premium needs to be factored by utilization of the plan. isolved has the tools that can help calculate that. And then as the administrator, you can certainly reach out to our support team. If there's any comments, questions, or concern, they can help you walk you through that. That's just one of the many reasons why outsourcing to a third-party vendor like isolved for COBRA is very beneficial for an employer group. This can get very, very in the weeds and very confusing, very easy for an employer. We help ease that a ton. So are there any questions on these plans before I move into the notices piece? Perfect. So let's talk about notices. You know, in addition to what types of benefits that you have to offer under COBRA, there are required communications that have to go out called notices. So COBRA notifications that have to go out, most employers think they're doing a really great job with this themselves and are familiar with at least the first two, but there's a lot more that are required under COBRA depending upon where somebody's at in their time frame. So we're going to cover those briefly here. Here's a kind of a little grid outlining all of them, and we're going to touch on the importance of each one of them here in just a minute. But that general notice, a lot of people call it the initial notice, is extremely important. Employers tend to know about that one and maybe 50-50 if they're doing it themselves. And then the qualifying event notice, which is like the actual offering of COBRA, those are the two that they typically understand. But obviously everybody knows about that one. All these other notices, however, people tend to either disregard or forget about, but they're very important and applicable and can be a problem if not sent out should there be an IRS audit. So let's start with the general notice. This goes to anybody that enrolls into group health plan coverage brand new for the first time. It can be any covered employee, spouse, or dependent. They all need this notice. It's extremely important. This notice sets the tone of COBRA compliance because it gives them their rights and responsibilities. Now, the required time frame is 90 days from when coverage commences for that employee. So if I start today and I have a 30-day waiting period, my group coverage will start maybe sometime toward the end of October or possibly the 1st of November, 1st of the month following 30 days is my waiting period. So November 1st is when you would want to send that notice out. Don't do it before. You don't want to confuse people saying, here's some COBRA detail, but maybe they never actually enroll in coverage. It can be confusing. So as soon as coverage starts, you have 90 days to get that general notice out. That is an important rule of thumb and a very important notice. Then we have the notice from the QB to the plan administrator. Some people call it the initial notice from the qualified beneficiary to the plan administrator. So this is kind of what sets the tone for the general notice. These are the things that are detailed in it. Hey, employee, if you experience a divorce or a dependent that ages off your plan, etc., you need to tell us about it so the administrator can outline their obligations. We then have the notice of unavailability. Now we're starting to get into some notices here that tend to be overlooked, but are still extremely important. There's a notice of unavailability that goes out. Hey, COBRA is no longer available for whatever reason. This one's not very common, but again, certainly required. And this would go to that question that you had regarding an employer filing bankruptcy. That this is one of those notices. Then you've got the qualifying event notice. I'm going to slow down a little bit on this one because it's the most recognizable notice. A lot of people just call it the election notice, but collectively it's the qualifying election event notice. This one is the one that must go out when somebody has experienced a COBRA qualifying event. They had an event plus a loss of coverage. Now we're going to offer COBRA. That's done on this particular notice. It goes out to all qualified beneficiaries. We'll talk about what those notices look like here in a second, but all qualified beneficiaries must receive it. It details their rights to elect COBRA. There's a lot of information in there. The information or the verbiage that is in these notices are driven, of course, by the IRS and DOL. So it is very detailed and needs to be sent and provided within 44 days of the loss of coverage date. Let me explain the 44 days. Sometimes you hear it's required to go out within 30 days. When there is a COBRA administrator brought on board to help an employer out, the employer has 30 days to report the event to the COBRA administrator. The administrator, isolved as an example, has 14 days to get the notice out the door. So total, it's 44 days. It's always that timeline to keep mindful of when an event occurs, 44 days. It's to be sent via first-class mail because first-class mail is deemed delivered unless returned by the Postal Service. That way, it meets the IRS and DOL audit guidelines if they're requesting a proof of mailing. Let's move on to the extension notice. There's an extension notice that also has to go out. Somebody is extending their COBRA timeline past that original 18 months of coverage. That notification needs to also be sent to all qualified beneficiaries. Now, we've already talked about what extends someone's COBRA that's in a secondary event, such as divorce, dependents aging off the plan, Medicare entitlement, or the disability extension. But that extension notice plays a part in that and is very important. We also have the open enrollment notice that needs to be sent. This is an employer required piece that tends to get overlooked or forgot about. But if you're changing plans, carriers, premiums, it's very important to treat your qualified beneficiaries the same as an active employee. They need to be offered open enrollment as well. Of course, it's open enrollment for the COBRA eligible plans only, medical, dental, vision, which is the list that we talked about earlier. So ideally, most employers, when they're conducting open enrollment for their actives, they also conduct open enrollment for their COBRA population as well. And then make sure that the information shared with them is what you would share with your active employees, except for the premium piece, because that will vary. Notice of plan changes. This notice of plan change is also a required notice. COBRA enrollees do not need to be treated the same for plan changes. Obviously, any of those COBRA individuals need to know when you're making those benefit changes. That way they can adjust coverage if need be. Maybe they need to go to the marketplace or something like that because it's now become affordable. And this notice of early termination also applies to that question that we had asked. If somebody terminates their COBRA early, that's a required notification that must go out. Early termination is anything that ends prior to their 18, 29, or 36 month of coverage, depending upon each individual situation. But it basically needs to say, hey, COBRA has ended early for you. Lots of notices, and we're not done yet. Conversion notice. That brings us to this conversion notice, which is another one that needs to go out. This is sent 180 days before somebody's COBRA expires. So maybe I'm terminating an employee. The employee is currently on COBRA and getting up to that 18 month of coverage. 6 months prior to that end date, this notice needs to go out. This notice says, hey, your COBRA is going to be ending soon. You might want to take advantage of the plan's conversion option if available. This notice is basically giving them information on converting from a COBRA policy to something else. You'll notice a common thing also on all of these notices. They are all sent first class mail because it meets the IRS and DOL requirements. You will hear me talk about that a lot because it is extremely important. This conversion notice needs to be sent to anybody that is currently continuing the benefit, not just that employee. If I elected coverage, COBRA coverage for myself, spouse, and dependents, that notice needs to be addressed to everybody on that plan. I would recommend contacting your current carriers that you're enrolled with to see if they have conversion policies available right now. So any questions on the nitty-gritty of the notices?
Yeah, one more came in for us, Joanna. Aside from the bankruptcy example, which has kind of been littered throughout here, what are some other cases where an employer might terminate COBRA early? I'll go back a slide or two.
Truthfully, it could be just about anything. And I mean, I can see if I can get some examples for you, but off the top of my head, that's kind of getting into the weed to specifics. The most common ones are the ones that I mentioned.
Okay.
But let me take a note really quick.
I suppose non-payment of premium on the employee's part is probably one of those common ones as well.
Most definitely, yes. It just would not necessarily apply to the notice itself. And I see a question here. What if the FSAs do not roll over for the next year? Are they still subject to COBRA? I know that they would be subject to COBRA at least for that plan year. I would need to double check on the remaining rollover. Obviously, there's no rollover, but are they able to take advantage of the run out?
I do have one more for you if you're able to take it now.
Absolutely.
Can the general notice be included in the enrollment guide or an online employee portal and still meet the requirements, or does it need to go by first class mail?
It needs to go by first class mail.
Okay, thank you.
And what a great segue. COBRA notice in the mail. Any of these COBRA notices should be delivered via first class mail. By sending it first class mail, it meets the IRS and DOL audit requirements, allowing you to prove the notice was sent unless deemed undeliverable. That is why it's so important that it goes first class mail. So all of those notices need to be addressed to everyone in the household on the plan. They need to be sent first class mail. If an individual on the plan does not live in the household, then a second notice must be sent to them. Don't hand notices out. Do not include it in the new hire paperwork or exit interviews. It will not pass or meet documentation that everybody should get it. So great question. Perfect segue. Thank you so much. Now we're going to talk about election periods and time frames. So now we're offering COBRA to an individual, terminated employee, former spouse, former dependent, whatever the situation may be. There are required timelines that you need your COBRA administrator to meet. You as the employer, your COBRA administrator would meet on behalf of you as the employer. And don't forget, COBRA is an employer law that they need to be abiding by. So let's talk about those timeframes in some more detail. When you're offering COBRA, we've already talked about the fact you have 44 days from the loss of coverage date to say, hey, you're being offered COBRA. Then your qualified beneficiaries have 60 days to decide if they want to elect COBRA. That 60 days starts from the loss of coverage date or when the notice is mailed, whichever is the latter. Typically, it's that mailed notice date, but they have 60 days from then to decide. Then if they want to exhaust their whole time frame, they've used COBRA, they've had 60 days to elect. From there, they elect, then they'll be given another 45 days to pay any retro premiums. COBRA is retroactive. And forgive me, I might have skipped that part, but COBRA was designed so that there is no gap in coverage. My next slide will show a timeline. Just note there's a long runway for an individual to decide if they want to continue COBRA, elect the benefits to continue the group coverage, and it all goes retroactive. So 44 days to get caught up on premiums, and then going forward, once they're caught up and current, 30 days to make every monthly premium after that. So here's a good timeline as well. Somebody lost coverage on January 31st. A COBRA qualifying event kind of happened. They waited until April 5th to make their COBRA election, and then they waited again until May 3rd to get caught up on their premiums. That's like a 4-month window there just to get COBRA up and running. But you know what some people might want to use their full time frame. These were specifically designed around the thought of, gosh, that's really expensive. Do I need it? Maybe they didn't think they needed it originally, and then something catastrophic happened. I better get that election paid for premium caught up. So that way there's no gap in coverage. It's designed to protect the qualified beneficiaries. That is why there's such a long runway. Any questions on the time frames before we move to the next piece of COBRA?
Two have come in for us here. One related back to notice requirements, and then the other one for timeframes here. The first one that comes in is what happens, so say an employee or a qualified beneficiary elects COBRA and moves during their COBRA entitlement, and they fail to notify the previous employer. What obligation does the employer have to chase that employee down and let them know, get those notices to them?
Well, a couple things to keep in mind with that. And this is why I'm always harping on that first class mail. If it is deemed delivered, then the responsibility of the employer has been met. If it is deemed undelivered, then the employer needs to find out the address of the new employee, or the new address of the employee, so that they can meet the COBRA guidelines. But if the postage has been deemed delivered and not returned to sender, then the COBRA obligation has been met.
Okay. A second question that came in is if the employer and the COBRA administrator are in a co-employment relation or a PEO, do they still have a total of 44 days from the date of loss of coverage to get the notice out?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually work with several PEOs. Perfect. All right. Any other questions that I miss?
Nope.
I think there's one here in the chat. Some groups keep on coverage until the end of the month, not terminating benefits when the employment ends. When does COBRA start? The actual day of termination of when the benefits end. Paula asked this question. So COBRA starts on the last day of benefits. So if you terminate the middle of the month and your benefits don't end until the end of the month, COBRA starts that end of benefits date. Great question. So let's talk about COBRA ending events. Once somebody's on COBRA, they're going to remain on COBRA until something happens to where they can't be. There are going to be a handful of things that would cause somebody's COBRA coverage to end. Obviously, the most kind of one that's front and center is going to be expiration. So at the end of 18 months, you can have it for 18 months. You've reached the 18 months and COBRA completely ends. We got voluntary termination of it, involuntary termination, or a reduction of hours for that 18 months. Same thing for disability extension. They've exhausted their COBRA 18 months. They were approved and granted that extra 11 months, and now they're at the 29-month COBRA ends. And then finally, those 36 months of coverage, divorce, situation, dependents aging off the plan, they reach their full 36-month COBRA timeline, COBRA ends. COBRA can also terminate for failure to make payment if they do not make payment on time. Very, very important to have a good process in place. Perhaps a good COBRA administrator in place to monitor this piece, because if somebody does not make the payment on time, they've canceled for non-payment, you do not, as the employer, have to reinstate them if you don't want to. And in fact, we would advise against it, because the minute you make an exception, you've now set a precedent. So keep that in mind. If you don't make a payment timely, COBRA ends. If you become covered on another group health plan, COBRA ends. If you become enrolled into Medicare, post-COBRA, elected COBRA a couple months later, and then decide to elect Medicare for whatever reason, COBRA ends. And this goes to that first question. And of course, if the group health plan just doesn't exist anymore, and it does happen, somebody's on COBRA 6 months down the road, company no longer exists, they decide not to renew for the next year, they can't afford group health plans, whatever, if there's no coverage to be enrolled in, your COBRA ends. I saw a question come through, Randy, if you wanted to share with me what that was.
Yes, when it comes down to premiums, and should someone choose to contract with isolved for this service, would isolved collect and track the COBRA premiums, or is the group still remain in control of that function?
Yes, premium collection is part of our core COBRA service. So the best answer, the quick answer would be yes. isolved would invoice, we would collect the premium. We, as the administrator, retain the 2% fee, and then we remit the premium we've collected back to the employer so they can turn around and pay their carriers.
Excellent. Thank you.
Of course. And continuing on with COBRA terminating, if you're on a disability extension under COBRA and you no longer meet the disability requirements, COBRA will end. COBRA can also end for cause. Keep in mind common sense stuff here for cause. That's open for interpretation, but it's written in there. Cause can be discussed amongst employers, legal counsel, IRS auditors, all of that stuff. So proceed with caution, but it can happen. So let's talk about enrollment options. Once somebody's COBRA ends, you can enroll into the marketplace coverage, right? Maybe a group health plan is not available to you for whatever reason. Maybe you become self-employed or something like that. COBRA is ceasing at the end of an event that would allow for you to enroll into the marketplace mid-year outside of open enrollment. Qualifying life events would also allow you to enroll in the marketplace as well. So once COBRA ends, there are options. isolved has actually a really great service that we have been asked not to automatically add on to any of the action benefits proposals that we provide, but it does assist COBRA, potential COBRA participants with finding a health plan that might be outside of COBRA that could be more affordable for them. If the time comes you'd like more information on that, if you as a brokerage do not already offer something like that, I'd be more than happy to provide it. So moving on, now, when somebody's on COBRA, they're continuing their benefits month over month. We mentioned if they don't pay on time, their COBRA will terminate. Premiums that are charged under COBRA must be considered or defined as an applicable premium. The calculation is the full monthly amount that the carrier charges you as the employer plus 2%. That 2% is charged to the COBRA participant and then retained, remitted, and collected on the invoice back to the COBRA administrator. When somebody's on a disability extension, the law says, you know what, you can go up to an extra 50% of that applicable premium if you choose to. So we got a little bit of math scenario here. We're not going to go through them in detail because they're pretty self-explanatory, but standard COBRA premium is 102% of that monthly rate. Under the disability extension, the employer can choose to go up to 150% if they wish. Obviously, the law allows for that added increase in premium because anybody on a disability extension is also an individual that is likely to have a high utilization of that benefit, high exposure to that plan. They're the ones driving up that premium. So it allows for a little bit of relief for the employer. So you're only allowed to increase premiums once in the middle per year. The only time that you can change it outside of the once per year plan is if you've not been charging the 102% and doing 100% this whole time and you realize, I can do 2% as well. Let's go ahead and get that added before my renewal happens. If there's been a change allowed mid-year. So for whatever reason, the employee wants a more expensive plan option, or they need to go from two-person up to a family at open enrollment. Obviously, that's going to create an increase, or they're going to go into that disability extension where we talked about it could go up to 150%. Any questions on this part of it before we move on to managing COBRA?
Just one clarifying question.
Yeah.
Suppose the group's medical plan renews, and of course premiums never go down, they increase, right? The COBRA premium would then increase in line with the group plan. Is that correct?
Yes. So we at isolve will send notification and ask that plans and rates be updated, which can be done directly in our portal, or we do have a team that updates those to make sure that we are providing the proper rate when we send out the notices.
Thank you. And one more.
Is that the Margaret Harris one?
Yes, it is.
So when you say, does the employer have to charge or can they contract to pay COBRA for some or all employees? So there is a subsidy portion in our portal where you can input the percentage if the employer is paying part of that premium, and then we make the adjustment when the notice goes out. When the election notice goes out and shows all those premiums, it includes that subsidy piece. Any other questions before I move on?
Yep, one more. If someone does increase the coverage level, can employees elect a higher coverage level than they have when they employed? So can they buy up for whatever reason? When they take COBRA, and the follow-up to that is if they were single, can they now elect family coverage on the COBRA extension?
Oh, you know what? I'm going to check on that one. I want to say yes, but I'm not 100% confident. Can you record those questions for me, Randy, so that I can take those back? I want to make sure I get the correct answers.
Yes, will do.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Anything else?
All clear now?
Some of these that I'm not 100% confident with, I'd much rather take them as takeaways and get you the correct answer than give you incorrect information. The compliance piece is so important to this. I want to make sure I'm not leading you down the primrose path. So let's talk about managing COBRA. Managing COBRA's got a lot of components to it. We talked about all the requirements around employers. We talked about who's required to offer COBRA, 20 or more employees with 50% of their typical business days within the preceding calendar year. They are all subject to COBRA. There's more than just medical, dental, and vision benefits that are offered under COBRA. Qualified beneficiaries are all eligible to continue coverage in their own individual rights. That TAMRA enforces it, and there are a lot of things to be mindful of. So when managing COBRA compliance, be mindful that all of these items listed here on the screen, all of these things must be met when we're working with COBRA. isolved makes it easy. When thinking about simplifying all of those things on the previous screen, isolved has actually put together a compliance checklist. We have one specific to COBRA that says here are all the things, all of the pieces, all of the steps, all of the notices you need to have in place documented, what you need to have to be 100% COBRA compliant. That whole checklist surrounds the TAMRA enforcement. It talks about what notices you're gathering, how the elections and premiums are handled, the process in place for all of those things. Overall, a fantastic checklist to use. All of those items are needed to be 100% compliant. I will send Randy after today's meeting a copy of that COBRA compliance checklist to fan out to everybody so that you have it. Ooh, sorry. This is just terrible. And don't forget, isolved to here is help. We're always here to help, actually. We do not administer COBRA. Well, yes, we do. We do not only administer COBRA, but we do it very well. We talked about early on when we kickstarted how COBRA was founded back in the 80s under the Reagan administration. So it was April of 1986 that COBRA was founded. isolved was born as COBRA Compliance Systems out of Coldwater right here in Michigan in December of that very same year. So we've actually been doing COBRA since its inception. It started off by just a couple of local benefit brokers here in Michigan that said, hey, employer groups, I'll write your group benefits. And then this law just passed. You guys might want to take a look at it and be sure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed very quickly. Our husband and wife brokerage said, well, we better take care of this for our groups because they don't want anything to do with it. And that's how our company was founded today, off of COBRA compliance. So not only do we administer well, but it's our own proprietary system. So the portal that we use is owned, operated, and maintained by isolved. The major benefit to that is that as COBRA compliance updates take place, we don't have to send a file to a third-party vendor, wait for them to update their system, which could cause a lag in time, potentially getting you out of compliance. We go in, we update the system immediately, keeping you in compliance the entire way. Not only do we do COBRA, we have a list of other programs that we offer, such as I mentioned the FSAs, multiple kinds of HRAs. We do HSAs, we do the FMLA and non-compensation based leave management. We have compliance pieces like ERISA, WRAP documents, 5500 filings, POP documents. We do ACA print and file. We have direct billing. So if you have retirees or maybe staff that's out for maternity leave, but they still want to maintain coverage and you have to collect premium from them, we will direct bill for those. If you just need notice mailings to go out, we have that available. We have non-discrimination testing available for our Section 125, for health and dependent care FSAs, and for that Section 105H, which is the HRA. So as you can see, we are definitely not limited on the benefit services side to COBRA. So please keep us in mind for everything as we move forward with our relationship. And that, my friends, is everything on COBRA. So, what additional questions do we have?
We have one more that comes in to as much as you're able to say about this, at least without
Sure.
a whole pricing chart. But can you tell a little bit about the pricing model? Is it per employee? Is it a cost by group size? How are the benefit services, especially for COBRA admin, priced?
So let me speak to COBRA specifically. And first, great question. And while I can't give you like a pointed answer, I can give you something that'll help make sense. We charge per insured employee per month, or we have an annual minimum. COBRA is billed annually from isolved. That is the program that we have that is billed annually. If you have a larger group with a larger premium, during the implementation process, they can request monthly or I believe quarterly billing, which can be accommodated. But the rule of thumb is we bill annually. When I say per insured employee per month, that is the active employee at the company that we are charging for. So if you have 50 employees and you have 45 of those employees that are enrolled in a benefit, we are going to charge you for those 45 employees. And we're either going to charge that per insured employee per month rate, or we're going to charge you that annual minimum, whichever is greater. Now, I can't give you direct pricing because we are negotiable depending on the size of the group. When we have some larger groups, I'm able to do a little bit of adjusting. So I don't want to give you a hard and fast number. You can always come to me for a proposal. We're really good. Unless I'm on PTO, I'm getting you a proposal within 24 hours from my sales team. And if I am on PTO, you can reach out to my sales team directly so you're not waiting. We have other programs, let's say our flexible benefits. So anything considered FBA, which is flexible benefits administration, or flexible benefits. Those are billed monthly, and the rates for those vary. Couple things to keep in mind on that. We only charge one fee per participant. So if you are offering an FSA, a limited purpose FSA, and a dependent care FSA, we're only going to first of all charge one fee. So if John Smith elects all three of those, you're only getting charged one time for him, not for each that he's elected. So we have that fee per participant or a monthly minimum, whichever is greater. That will be the fee that's charged. We don't have a minimum number of participants. You can have an FSA with 2 participants, but we will charge that monthly minimum fee because you would not exceed that with the participant fee multiplied. And we also have like flat fees for things like the POP and the compliance services like ERISA, etc. Again, the best rule of thumb is to come to me for a proposal. You email me requesting a proposal. I'm going to respond to that email with a form I've created. It has a lot of questions on it, but they're all questions that we need. I do try to pre-fill any information you've already given me, or remove any questions that are not applicable for the service that you're requesting a proposal for, just to make it a little bit easier. I utilize that form because not only does it help me gather the information I need to provide proper pricing, it helps my team that puts together my proposals and agreements do it more quickly because they have all of the information in a specific format in front of them. Sorry, that was long-winded.
That's okay. I do want to mention to our brokerage partners that we have made some forms available for you in a variety of ways, and your account managers can help you access those forms. So if there's a lead you'd like to get over to iSolve, there's a group you want to request a quote from, easiest to do it through us. That makes sure that we can track, what kind of attention you're getting, and we can best serve you going forward, and frankly to help compensate you for the leads you throw iSolve's way. So we do ask that when you do have a lead, please come work through us, work through our account managers, work through some of the forms we provided to you. We're happy to pass that on to Johanna and her team so that you can get everything you need to serve your groups best.
Awesome.
Okay.
This was word salad. I know that right now everybody's brains is ready to explode because when I first started doing COBRA, my brain was ready to explode. It's the same way on demos. I always tell my brokers, after a demo, questions are going to come up. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. If I don't have the answer, I have an amazing team of resources that I can go to get you the correct answers. So I'm here for you.
All right. One more question that came in from us from Paula. Uh, Can you talk a little bit about mini COBRA? We know it's not an option in Michigan, but how does it affect groups that have common control from their headquarters if their Fed IDs are not in Michigan? And that state does allow for mini COBRA.
So I would ask that you include that, because if I'm
Yep.
being honest, Randy, my territory includes two states, Michigan and Indiana. Neither one mini COBRA is required. Now, my territory is based on where the broker is located, not the group. So I do occasionally write groups where we do offer state continuation, aka mini COBRA. But the
Yep.
actual guidelines and in and outs of it, I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not well versed on it because 90% of what I see does not include state continuation. So I would rather go to an expert to get that answer for you. And I apologize, I can't give one to you today.
That's quite all right. I will add it to the pile.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. I know I just came off of PTO, but I'm really looking forward to the additional R&R. I'm sure you are too. Ramping up for Q4, everybody.
We are. All right. Well, thank you, Johanna, for sharing your time and knowledge here today. Thank you to our agent partners for sharing your time and attention here today. Lots of good stuff here. Lots of good reason to be excited about this partnership. And we look forward to supporting you grow your business with partnerships like the one with isolved and other ones we are working on as well. Should you have any questions, please feel free to get them over to our team. Otherwise, on behalf of Johanna, the entire team here at Action Benefits, and myself, please enjoy your holiday weekends. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, everybody.